Okay, hello, Travis Gardner here. Today talking about the flipped classroom, and please keep in mind this is a home video. We are not professionals, this is entirely amateur. Alright, we're going to talk about RtI and the big picture, the theory of RtI. So, without getting into too much of what other states are doing, what's Wisconsin doing? Well, Wisconsin recently adopted a formal structure for RtI, and as you see, this is the triangle that you may have heard of at some point along the line, with these three components: high quality instruction, collaboration, balanced assessment, and we should have right at the center of it is culturally responsive practices. I'll just put this big circle right here so you can remember that this is culturally responsive practices. Now, what does it mean to be in Tier 1? Tier 1 means we're trying to target 80% of our population. Usually that means 80% of our curriculum and our instruction should be ideally reaching that group without any alterations, if you will, to the curriculum. Instructional practices, we always vary, and that's an ongoing process. Tier 2 is really 15 to 20% of the population, and that could mean students who have needs outside of the accommodations and some of the modifications that you can do in class. They need some extra skill building, they need some extra supports. Tier 3, those are our struggling students for a variety of reasons. That could be with academic, behavior, social, emotional, but these are the students who need the most support we can provide. Now, keep in mind, this also happens along a continuum. This is a continuum of service. Just like a school system provides a continuum of service, so does RtI. This is the continuum. All students should be able to move seamlessly through this continuum from point A to point B, this being point A. I want to draw your attention to a couple things. RtI can have an academic focus. Okay? We're all pretty familiar with the different curriculum and instructional components connected to what that means. This might be differentiation with reading instruction or a content area skill. Tier 2, an example of some of the differentiated academic instructions, might be a small group or one-on-one supports, and or using a flipped classroom instructional style or an online style for learning. Tier 3 might be a combination of all three of those. I'm just going to mention behavior because we're beginning to explore what positive behavior intervention supports look like, also known as PBIS. More will be coming on that, but that's really a Tier 1 activity that hopefully we'll be rolling out next year. Now I'm going to go back and refer you to the lesson objective. We want to define and explain what RtI will look like at West next year. So you have a picture of what the RtI theory is. And in the next segment, you're going to see what RtI application can look like here at West. Before I go, I want to leave you with some future possibilities which are no longer here on board. I'm going to tell you about it. One would be, how do we utilize maps to its fullest potential? 2, how do we use data-driven practices across all areas, be it instruction, informing student feedback, informing parents, and so on and so forth. And 3, RtI is really big, and let's keep in mind that this is a process, and we can develop this as a team, as a school, and as a community of educators. Let's keep the focus on our professional development and what we can do to help students along the way. Thank you for your time. I'm going to refer you to the board for our lesson objective. I can define and explain how RtI, response to intervention, will look at Waukesha West next year, 2012-2013. We're going to start with the application, and as we move over here, you'll see we have an ice cream cone. You'll also see within the ice cream cone there are 3 tiers. These are important because a lot of the RtI research and conversation focuses on Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. We're going to do our best to give you a brief overview focusing today on Tier 1. Tier 1, as Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction defines it, includes high quality instruction, collaboration, balanced assessment, and at the heart of it is culturally responsive practices. So, let's begin with collaboration. I'm going to provide you with the definition. You're already thinking, I know what collaboration means. It means to co-labor. Well, that's right. It means to work together. DPI provides us with the definition of a process where people work together towards a common goal. And it's part of an RtI system. So, as you think about your teacher teams and your grade level teams and the process you go through, please be thinking about how do you co-labor, work together with the people around you in your specific areas. Some questions to be considering for 2012-2013 and what RTI can look like around collaboration are: what structures in our school support or interfere with your collaborative time? What are some ideas for creating more collaborative time? How are your students at the center of your professional learning? How could West put students at the center of that professional learning, especially focused on collaborating? And how could West use PLC time to increase teacher effectiveness connected to student outcomes? And just to leave you with a few thoughts about what strong PLCs look like. First, they share norms and values. We all have to agree that this is important, why it's important, and what our focus is. There has to be some sort of reflective dialogue. I think I heard you say, or it sounds like you're getting to. There has to be a collective focus on student learning, again, keeping students at the center of what we're doing. And there has to be a spirit of shared responsibility for all students. Okay, let's move on then. We're still in Tier 1, and we're still talking about these 4 components. We're going to move on to balanced assessment. Let me get to the right page. Thank you. And as you can see, I am not the sage on the stage. I'm merely a guide on the side. So, focusing on balanced assessment, what's the definition that the Department of Public Instruction gives us? You're wondering? It is a continuous review of student progress involving a balanced, systematic process of constant inquiry. Probably sounds familiar, but let's consider a few things about the application of this. Remember, it's one of 4 components. What does response to intervention assessment practice look like at West? Do we have any in place right now? Are we looking to develop some? How do you use data to inform instructional practice or your instructional practice? Are you using your formative instruction, that data, to help guide what your practices look like with students on a regular basis to build competency for those summative assessments? Teachers often mention that change is scary for me. What part of this RTI model might be scary for you, and what types of support would be helpful in taking away some of that? And lastly, give examples of differentiated instruction at West. What kind of support will you need in promoting and developing differentiated assessments and differentiated assessment that can help inform instruction? And now I said lastly, but I really want to go back to this culturally responsive practice piece, because this is kind of a big one that we really need to key in on. And I'm going to ask you a few questions to consider. So for example, what practices do we see that are culturally responsive in our assessment or in our instruction? And that's a big question, and we're going to need to continue to struggle with that and figure out what that means for all of our students. Keeping in mind that there's strong evidence that cultural practices shape thinking processes, and cultures must be considered as central to teaching and learning. I'll give you one last example. The iceberg model or concept of culture often says, when we look at an iceberg, we see only 1/10 of what is actually exposed. This is the water line. This is an iceberg. When we think of culture, we often only think of this percentage of culture right here. We miss about 9/10 of what students actually bring to the classroom, especially related to their cultural practices. So I'm going to encourage you to go look up or think further about the iceberg model of cultural competence. Okay, let's move on. We're still in Tier 1. We've talked about collaboration, balanced assessment, we've touched on culturally responsive practice, now we're going to move to high quality instruction. High quality instruction means, as DPI defines it, we respond to individual differences in the learning community. Well, that's kind of broad. What we know it looks like is that good instructional practices will reach at minimally 80 to 85% of our students. That leaves 15 to 20% of our students who aren't getting our instructional practices. That means we need some differentiation. We need some alternatives to our skill set or standard set of instruction. Now, we're going to come back to this later. We're going to shift over to what will RTI look like at West in 2012-2013. High quality instruction is going to cover academic options and we will be seeing tangible and visible differentiation in the classroom. Balanced assessment can look like student screening and progress monitoring, and supported differentiation practices. Collaboration. We'll have AO captains, there'll be a revised leadership structure, and there'll be a PLC teacher leader. So as you think about, we're back to our objective, I can define and explain how RtI will look at Waukesha West next year. These should be 3 tangible differences that you'll be seeing throughout the year, and hopefully you'll want to be engaged in that process. I'm going to leave you with this thought, though, about these are the 4 components of what RtI looks like in Wisconsin. There's 3 layers of how we support students. We've only talked about Tier 1, and next year we're going to spend getting clearer and fleshing this out. And these will be some of the ways that we do this. Thank you for your time and your attention.